world carved by winter, where silence can bury a man's hope and loyalty is the only thing strong enough to survive. One soldier thought his battles were over. One dog vanished into the frozen wild, and destiny dared them both to keep fighting. This winter, a miracle will cross mountains, defy death, and remind us that some bonds can't be broken. Not by storms, not by distance, not by time. This is the story of Ethan and Valor, a soldier's heart, a warrior's dog, and the journey that brought them home. Before the story begins, hit subscribe, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Winter dragged itself across Montana like a slow, wandering ghost, dropping fine sheets of cold mist over the valley and painting the small timber town of Alder Creek in shades of silver and stillness. The morning light was pale, thin like a memory fading at the edges, and the sky hung low with quiet snow waiting to fall. Ethan walked with the posture of a man who had learned to survive storms far worse than anything nature offered. His boots pressed deep into the frosted ground, steady and unhurried. At 33 years old, Ethan's tall, muscular frame moved with the unmistakable discipline of a United States Navy serviceman. Broad shoulders, strong forearms, and a controlled gait hinted at years of physical conditioning. His short, dark brown hair was neatly trimmed beneath his cold-weather cap, and his clean, unscarred face carried the calm intensity of someone who had seen chaos and learned to hold it without flinching. His skin was fair but sun-hardened, and his eyes, deep, sharp blue, held stories no civilian could easily read. He filled out the NWU Type 3 uniform effortlessly, the green and tan digital pattern molding to his rigid posture. Ethan Graves walked as if every step was weighed, measured, and filed into order. He wasn't deployed now. He wasn't leading a team. He wasn't running an operation. And yet, every movement still belonged to a soldier who didn't know how not to be one. Coming back to Montana was supposed to be the first step toward learning that. He wasn't sure he had made any progress. He was only sure that today felt heavier than most. His breath steamed into the cold air as he approached the small, weathered building on the edge of town, Alder Creek Animal Rescue, a lonely wooden structure huddled beneath the pine-covered hillside. He wasn't here for himself. He was returning a favor to an old neighbor, the kind woman who always left extra food on his porch when he came home from deployments, even though she pretended it was accidental. Her name was Marjorie Ellison, a soft-spoken widow in her early 70s with a hunched posture, gentle gray hair, and hands that trembled when she held warm mugs. She had baked pies for half the town, but more importantly, she had once waited for someone who never returned from war. When she asked Ethan to drop off 2 bags of kibble she'd bought for the shelter, he couldn't say no. He rarely said no to her. Maybe because her lonely strength reminded him too much of the families he had seen waiting overseas. Or maybe because kindness deserved respect, even when it felt undeserved. The shelter door creaked when he pushed it open, letting out a rush of warm air thick with the smells of straw, disinfectant, and the anxious musk of animals who didn't understand why they'd been left behind. A few dogs barked in the back. A metal bowl clanged. A draft whispered through the lobby. Behind the front desk stood Nora Bradley, the shelter manager. She was in her late 30s, slender but strong, with caramel brown hair tied in a messy bun and warm hazel eyes framed by glasses. Her face showed fatigue, the kind earned not from lack of sleep, but from caring too deeply for creatures no one else fought for. "Morning, Ethan," she said, smiling with genuine warmth. Dropping off supplies again? Ethan set the bags gently on the counter, his movements controlled yet careful. "Marjorie asked me to bring these in. She said the budget cuts have been rough." Nora exhaled a tired laugh. "Budget cuts have been rough for years, but at least people like her still remember us." Her eyes flicked briefly to Ethan's uniform and the strength he carried so effortlessly. "You could have left them at the door, you know." "Didn't want them sitting in the cold," he answered simply. "And it gave me something to do today." Nora nodded with that quiet understanding people wore when they recognized a man trying not to drown in stillness. "Well, thank you." Ethan gave a small nod, but his eyes drifted toward the row of kennels behind her, as something had pulled at his attention, a presence that didn't bark or scratch or beg for attention like the others. It was silence, a heavy, absolute silence. Nora saw the shift in his expression and followed his gaze. "That one just came in 2 weeks ago," she said softly. Came from the outskirts near Glacier Pass. No tag, no microchip. He won't let anyone near him. Not aggressive, just shut down. Ethan didn't reply. Something inside him, some quiet instinct honed by years of reading tension on battlefields, compelled him forward. His boots echoed down the hallway as he approached the last kennel. Inside, curled in the back corner, was a large German shepherd. The dog's coat was black and tan, though dulled by dirt and cold. His ears were uneven, one standing tall with vigilance, the other slightly bent from an old injury. His body was strong but starved, ribs faintly visible. But it wasn't his condition that struck Ethan like a blow to the chest. It was the eyes, deep, amber, not wild or fearful, not angry, just tired. Tired in a way Ethan recognized too well. The dog's gaze tracked him with almost military assessment, studying his posture, his pace, the direction of his breath. "He doesn't act like the others," Ethan murmured. Nora folded her arms. "Because he isn't like the others." Ethan crouched slowly, one knee pressing against the cool concrete. "What's his name?" "We gave him a placeholder," Nora said softly. "Valor." Ethan inhaled sharply, not because of the strength the name suggested, but because the dog reacted very subtly to hearing it. His head lifted an inch, his ears twitched, his chest tightened. Not with a growl, but with something like restrained expectation. Ethan's voice grew almost a whisper. "Valor?" The amber eyes didn't blink. They didn't retreat. They simply watched him, pinned him, as if comparing him to ghosts only he could see. Ethan swallowed. "He's been trained," he said with certainty. "Not family dog trained, tactical trained. Look at his stance, his breath pattern, the way he holds weight off his right paw. That's from repelling injuries. And that scar under his fur? That's from a harness." Nora looked stunned. "How do you even notice those things?" Ethan's jaw flexed. "Because I wore the same scars, and because I've worked with K-9 units overseas. They're soldiers, too." He didn't elaborate, but inside, memories flickered like slow-burning embers. Long nights in hostile terrain. Heavy breathing beside him, in the dark. The warmth of a K-9 partner pressed against his leg during air extraction. The moment a dog saved two teammates from a hidden IED at the cost of its own life. Dogs like Valor weren't pets. They were warriors, and they knew abandonment better than anyone. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight inside his chest shifting. He extended one steady hand, palm open, not touching the bars, just offering presence. Valor didn't move for a long moment. The room was silent except for the hum of heating vents and the distant shuffle of other animals. Then, slowly, the German shepherd lifted his head. His nose twitched, his body trembled once, and then his paw, hesitant, thin, trembling, crept a few inches forward. Not a touch, not a commitment, just a question. Ethan felt something crack inside him, something he thought war had stripped from him years ago. He whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." Nora's voice softened behind him. "He's never done that for anyone else." Ethan didn't take his eyes off the dog. "Because he doesn't trust anyone else." "Do you think he trusts you?" "No," Ethan answered quietly. "But he wants to." And wanting was more powerful than trust for creatures who had known betrayal. Ethan rose slowly and turned toward Nora. "What happens to him if no one adopts him?" Nora hesitated. "We try our best, Ethan, but he's shutting down. And dogs that stop fighting, they don't last long. Shelters can't save everyone." Ethan nodded, the reality sinking deep. He looked back once more. Valor hadn't looked away. Those amber eyes stayed locked on Ethan with fierce, a fragile desperation, like a soldier silently asking if this time the extraction bird was really coming. Something inside Ethan made the decision before he even breathed the words. "I'll take him." Nora blinked. "Ethan, he's complicated. He's traumatized. He's a working dog without a unit. Those dogs aren't easy." "Neither am I," Ethan replied, tone steady. "But we'll figure it out." Nora studied him, searching for hesitation and finding none. She nodded slowly. "All right, there's paperwork, a home check tomorrow, but yes, you're the best shot he has." Ethan looked once more at the German shepherd. This time, Valor's tail moved, just an inch, just a whisper. but enough to tell Ethan everything he needed to know. It wasn't joy, it wasn't trust, it was hope, and soldiers built their lives on hope, even broken ones. As Ethan stepped out into the cold, the snow finally began to fall, light, soft flakes drifting across the valley like blessings whispered from somewhere far above. He looked back through the frosted window. Valor was still watching, still waiting. And for the first time in months, Ethan felt a purpose that didn't come from orders, or missions, or chain of command. It came from a pair of amber eyes staring through a cage, asking silently whether someone would choose him again. Ethan whispered into the falling snow, "I'm coming back for you, I promise." And this time, it was a promise he intended to keep. Winter settled deeper across Alder Creek, as if the snow itself wished to bury every echo of the past. But Ethan knew better than to believe in clean slates. Healing was never quiet, and never simple, especially not for a soldier, and not for a dog who had once been one. Valor arrived at Ethan's cabin the day after the adoption papers cleared, stepping out of Nora Bradley's dusty shelter van with hesitant paws and searching eyes. The drive had been silent except for the steady hum of the engine and Ethan's low, even breath. Valor rode in the back seat, not curled or relaxed, but upright, alert, holding himself as though waiting for a command that never came. Ethan didn't reach for him. Soldiers learned long ago that forcing trust was the fastest way to lose it. The cabin sat on the eastern ridge, and tucked between dense pines and open white fields. It was a simple structure, wooden walls, stone chimney, slanted roof that groaned under snow. But to Ethan, it was the closest thing to home he had known in years. He stepped out first, inhaled the sharp scent of cold air, then opened the back door of the truck. "Come on," he said quietly. Valor hesitated but followed, stepping onto the snow with a precision that reminded Ethan of military K-9 insertion drills. No wasted movement, no unnecessary noise, only controlled adaptation. Inside the cabin, Valor kept near the door at first, gaze scanning corners, windows, furniture. Ethan left space. He set food and water down without comment, removed his coat, and busied himself with mundane tasks, stacking firewood, lighting the stove, boiling water. Every movement steady. Predictable. Predictability was safety, for both of them. It wasn't until night fell that the walls between them cracked. Ethan tried to sleep, but the quiet of Montana nights had a way of dragging old memories to the surface, and memories of deployment never arrive softly. He woke from a nightmare with a choking gasp, chest tight, muscles coiled as if bracing for impact. Sweat ran down the back of his neck despite the cold. He covered his face with both hands. "Not again," he whispered. But then, movement. A low, urgent whine. Valor. The dog pressed himself against Ethan's side, hesitant, as if unsure whether comfort was permitted, but insistent enough that Ethan felt the tremor running through the animal's body. Valor nudged his shoulder, then his chest, then sat upright, posture protective, not fearful, guarding. Yet Ethan had spent years around military dogs, but nothing prepared him for the sting of familiarity, of how naturally Valor moved into the role of a soldier, waking a teammate out of a trauma spiral. "You felt that, didn't you?" Ethan whispered hoarsely. Valor didn't blink. He just leaned closer, letting the weight of his presence ground Ethan back into reality. For the first time since leaving service, Ethan slept again. Not because nightmares vanished, but because someone was watching over him. Days passed, a fragile routine forming. Ethan worked around the cabin, cut firewood, cleared snow, maintained the truck, moved with military precision but slower now, no mission clock pushing him. Valor followed at a distance at first, watching with amber eyes full of questions. But slowly, step by step, he closed that distance. And as by the end of the first week, he no longer hovered near the door. By the second, he walked beside Ethan on their morning treks around the property, still cautious, but present. And then came the avalanche. It was late afternoon when Ethan went down the slope behind the cabin to inspect a section of fencing crushed by a fallen pine. The sky grew heavy with an oncoming storm, wind scraping across the ridge. Ethan knelt to clear the snow when a deep rumble vibrated through the ground. His instincts fired instantly. Avalanche! He looked up, eyes widening at the cascade of white roaring down the mountain toward him. Before he could react, Valor, who had been sniffing the tree line, bolted toward him, barking sharply, urgently. "Valor, go back!" Ethan shouted, but the shepherd didn't stop. Valor slammed into Ethan's chest with all his weight, while knocking him sideways into a depression between two rocks just as the surge of snow thundered past. Cold crushed them, pressure building, sound roaring like the earth splitting apart. Ethan shielded Valor instinctively, but when the snow settled, it was Valor who dug him out, paws scraping, body trembling, determination burning through panic. Ethan crawled free, gasping, stunned. Valor stood above him, tail rigid, ears forward, eyes fierce with protective instinct. Ethan whispered, "You saved my life." Valor lowered his head, touching Ethan's wrist with a quiet whine, as if saying he had simply done what he was trained to do. That was when Ethan understood. Valor hadn't lost his purpose, only his unit. That night, Ethan made stew while Valor watched him from beside the fire. The dog's fur still carried faint traces of crushed snow. Ethan's hands still shook when he ran them under warm water. He didn't speak of fear or death or the way the world had vanished beneath tons of snow. Instead, he said softly, "You don't have to be a soldier anymore." Valor blinked once. Ethan wished he believed his own words, but peace was never an easy sentence for those who had been shaped by danger. A week later, they met the people who would challenge that fragile peace. Snow fell in gentle spirals the morning a white state-issued truck rolled slowly up the cabin path. Ethan stepped outside, Valor instantly at his side, shoulders stiff, ears high. From the truck stepped two strangers bundled in thermal jackets marked with the emblem of the Montana State Search and Rescue K-9 Division. The woman approached first. Sergeant Lena Rowe was in her early 30s, and tall and slender, with long black hair braided tightly under a wool cap. Her skin was warm olive, her cheekbones sharp, and her dark eyes carried a focused intelligence. Something in her posture, the square set of her shoulders, the careful placement of her boots, signaled she had known hardship and refused to break under it. "Ethan Graves?" she asked, breath fogging in the cold. Her voice was firm but carried underlying warmth, as though she had spent years speaking to frightened survivors. Ethan nodded. "That's me." The man who stepped out behind her was broader, rugged, early 40s, with a square jaw covered in dark stubble. Marcus Hale, according to the badge on his jacket. His hair was cropped close, peppered with gray, and a faint scar cut beneath his left eye like a permanent reminder of near misses. He had the look of someone who had worked search and rescue long enough to lose teammates and save more lives than he could count. Marcus nodded once. "We're here about the dog." Valor moved closer to Ethan, a subtle but unmistakable protective shift. Lena softened her gaze. "We're not here to take him from you. We just need to ask a few questions." "He was scanned," Ethan said. "Nora told me his chip wasn't registered." "Not in civilian registries," Marcus replied. "But he isn't a civilian dog." Lena knelt slowly, careful not to move too fast, and studied Valor with practiced eyes. "This shepherd carries seal scars, harness burns, rappel strain, shrapnel nicks. And the way he positions himself between you and strangers?" She looked up. "Classic Tier 1 K-9 conditioning." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He belonged to the military." Lena nodded. And according to a classified log that just opened last month, a K-9 named Valor went missing 18 months ago during a coastal infiltration exercise. His handler was killed. The dog was presumed dead. Ethan felt a tightness form beneath his ribs, slow but sharp. He looked down at Valor, who sat motionless beside him, ears lowered, eyes shifting between the three humans as though trying to interpret old ghosts. Marcus spoke gently now. "We aren't here to force anything, but dogs like him, they don't just retire. Their instincts are too strong, their abilities too rare." Lena added, "We want to evaluate him. If he's willing, he might be capable of joining the state search and rescue K-9 team. Freeze rescues, wilderness extractions, avalanche detection." She looked at Ethan with something like respect. "He saved someone recently." "Didn't he?" Ethan didn't answer, but Valor stepped forward as if responding to the memory. The wind lifted, snow scattering between them like a veil. Ethan's voice was low when he finally spoke. "He's been through enough." "So have a lot of us," Marcus replied quietly, his scar catching the morning light. "But saving people, it heals something war can't." There was no pressure in his tone, no recruitment pitch, only truth spoken by someone who had lived both sides of danger. Ethan looked down at Valor. The shepherd's posture was alert, tense, but not afraid. More like he was waiting for Ethan to decide something he already knew the answer to. Ethan exhaled slowly. "One evaluation," he said. "Nothing more." Lena smiled softly. "That's all we ask." As they set up simple scent tests in the clearing beside the cabin, Ethan watched Valor's eyes sharpen, his breath steady, his body shift into precision he hadn't shown since the avalanche. It wasn't excitement, it wasn't fear, it was purpose. When the evaluation ended nearly an hour later, Marcus whistled low. "I've never seen a civilian dog run a cold trail that clean." Lena nodded. "Valor isn't just good, he's elite." Ethan's chest tightened. He had known this moment might come, but knowing didn't soften the ache. Lena stepped closer, her expression gentle. "We're not asking for an answer today, but this dog was born to save lives. And sometimes, giving them their purpose back gives us ours too." Marcus adjusted his gloves and added, "Talk it over with him." Ethan almost laughed. "With him?" Marcus shrugged. "You'd be surprised how much dogs understand." They left shortly after, and their truck carving a path down the snowy road. Ethan stood alone in the cold, Valor pressed firmly against his leg. The shepherd looked up at him with deep amber eyes, steady, waiting, trusting him to choose the path forward. Ethan whispered into the quiet wind, "I don't know if I can let you go again." Valor didn't answer. He only leaned closer, and Ethan felt something inside him shift, something heavy, something inevitable. Whether either of them was ready or not, fate had already begun to move. The morning Ethan signed the papers felt colder than any winter he had known. Though the temperature outside hovered just above freezing, he stood in the clearing beside his cabin, the snow glistening beneath a pale sun, and Valor sat at his side, posture proud but uncertain, as if sensing the shift in the air. Sergeant Lena Rowe returned with the same white state-issued truck, her breath a silver fog as she approached. She moved quietly, respectfully, her long black braid tucked neatly inside her jacket. She greeted Ethan with a gentle nod, but her eyes, sharp, perceptive, carried understanding. She had seen this kind of goodbye before. Marcus Hale climbed out of the passenger side, the crisp wind catching the flecks of gray in his stubble. His heavy boots pressed into the snow with calm certainty. Marcus was not a man who softened easily. His face shaped by years of pulling bodies out of frozen valleys, of watching storms erase men in seconds. But today, even he held himself differently, as though recognizing that this exchange was not just paperwork, not just procedure, but something more fragile. "You sure about this?" Marcus asked quietly. Ethan didn't answer at first. He looked at Valor, at the dog who had saved him from an avalanche, comforted him through nightmares, watched him with eyes that understood more than an animal should. "No," Ethan said softly, "but I know it's what he was born for." Valor pressed closer to Ethan's leg, sensing tension long before humans ever could. His amber eyes locked onto Ethan with fierce loyalty. Ethan lowered himself, placing one strong, steady hand on Valor's neck. "You're ready for this," he said, and voice steady but frayed at the edges. "They need you, and maybe I need to learn how to let you be who you are." Valor nudged Ethan's chest, a soft whine escaping, a quiet plea or a reassurance. Ethan couldn't tell which. Lena kneeled beside them. "He'll be in good hands," she said. "He won't be alone, and I promise you, he'll have purpose. Dogs like him, they don't want rest. Not yet." Ethan nodded. Purpose. The one thing war gave and peace stole. Marcus approached with the reinforced training lead. Valor tensed, not in fear but in recognition. It was a working dog's lead, the kind used for tactical deployments. Ethan swallowed hard as Marcus clipped it gently to Valor's harness. "We'll bring him back to visit," Lena said softly. Ethan nodded, but didn't trust himself to speak. They guided Valor to the truck. Halfway there, he stopped and turned back toward Ethan, ears lifting, tail low, but signaling something Ethan recognized too well: conflict, devotion, and the instinct to stay. Ethan felt his heart fracture, but he forced himself to hold still. "Go," he whispered. Valor hesitated, then obeyed, a soldier following the last order of someone he trusted. As the truck disappeared down the road, the silence around Ethan thickened. The snow-covered valley, once a shelter, now felt empty. Ethan walked back into the cabin, alone. For the first time since Valor arrived, the room felt too large, too quiet, too hollow. The first letter came a week later, typed on official Montana search and rescue letterhead, signed by Sergeant Lena herself. Valor had passed every initial assessment. He excelled in scent detection, cold trail tracking, and avalanche alert tests. He is one of the strongest instinctual responders we've ever seen," Lena had written. "You gave him back his purpose, Ethan." Ethan read the letter 3 times, then placed it inside a wooden box he kept near the hearth. Over the months that followed, more letters arrived, some written by Lena, others by Marcus, each carrying updates that stitched Ethan's days together like a lifeline. Valor had located 2 hikers trapped under debris after a landslide. Valor had tracked the scent of a missing child for 7 miles through icy terrain, leading the team to safety. Valor had alerted early during a sudden storm, giving rescuers enough time to evacuate. With each report, Ethan felt pride swelling in his chest, but underneath it lay something quieter, sharper: loneliness. He kept busy around the cabin, chopping wood, clearing paths, hiking the ridge at dawn, the cold biting at his face. But every time the wind rustled the pines, he turned instinctively, expecting the soft crunch of paws behind him. Every night, he reached subconsciously toward the foot of the bed, expecting warmth that wasn't there. Healing was meant to be progress, but sometimes it felt like abandonment. Still, Ethan reminded himself, Valor was not gone. He was out there saving lives. Late autumn arrived with the bite of early frost. The letters slowed, then stopped. Ethan told himself it was normal. Search and rescue schedules were unpredictable, long. He repeated that excuse until even his disciplined mind began to reject it. Then one morning, a knock came at the door. Not gentle, not spaced, urgent. Ethan opened it to find a stranger, a woman bundled in a thick navy parka, had patches from the Alaska Federal Disaster Response Unit stitched onto her sleeve. She stood tall, about mid-40s, with sharp features softened only by exhaustion. Her dark brown skin, wind-burned and dry, suggested weeks spent in harsh conditions. The bags under her eyes, the tightness around her mouth. These were signs of someone who had given orders nobody wanted to follow. "Are you Ethan Graves?" she asked, voice rough. "Yes." She removed her gloves, revealing long, elegant fingers trembling just slightly. "I'm Commander Rhea Collins, Alaska Disaster Unit." Ethan's chest tightened. "Is this about Valor?" Her jaw clenched. Then she handed him a sealed envelope, the blue federal insignia stamped across it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Ethan opened it with hands that felt too heavy. The words blurred at first, until the world went silent around him. During an active avalanche extraction in the Denali South Ridge region, K-9 Valor was separated from his team. Multiple secondary collapses occurred, no signal detected, device found buried, status: missing. Missing, not dead, not alive. Suspended in a void that soldiers knew too well. Ethan steadied himself against the doorframe. What happened to his handler? He was injured but survived. Valor pushed him out of the blast radius. Ethan closed his eyes. That was who Valor was, who he had always been. Rhea hesitated, then spoke with a softened tone. "We're still searching, but the weather is brutal. We're doing everything we can." Ethan stared at the letter again. "Not enough," he whispered. "Not enough for him." Rhea didn't try to comfort him. Instead, she said, "I've seen warriors cling to life in ways you wouldn't imagine. If any K-9 could survive an avalanche, it would be him." He met her gaze, saw sincerity, not pity. Rhea stepped back into the cold. "If you come to Alaska, you won't be on any official roster, but no one will stop you from searching." And with that, she left. Ethan didn't sleep that night, or the next. By dawn, he had already packed thermal gear, ropes, rations, his Navy-issued survival knife, a compass worn smooth by years of service. And in the side pocket of his pack, he placed the first photo he had ever taken of Valor, sleeping by the hearth, paws twitching from a dream Ethan would never know. Snow fell steadily outside the cabin as he stepped onto the porch. The world looked the same as it always had, unchanged, indifferent. But the space beside him where Valor once walked felt like a wound. Ethan locked the cabin door, adjusted his pack, pulled his coat tighter, and without hesitation, he walked into the storm. Not as a soldier returning to duty, not as a handler reclaiming a partner, but as a man searching for the only creature who had understood him when the world had gone silent. The wind cut through the Alaskan mountains like a sharpened blade, slicing through layers of clothing, flesh, and bone with a cold that felt almost sentient. Ethan Graves trudged steadily through the white wasteland, the crunch beneath his boots swallowed immediately by the roaring storm around him. The mountains loomed in jagged silhouettes, dark, towering, merciless, while the sky churned with swirling ice like a living thing determined to erase all signs of life. Ethan wasn't alone. He marched alongside Sergeant Miguel Rojas, one of the team leaders assigned to the Alaska search patrols. Miguel was in his late 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard dusted in frost and deep-set brown eyes that always looked half-tired but never unfocused. His skin was a warm olive tone beneath the windburn, and he walked with the heavy, grounded steps of a man who had carried more bodies than survivors out of the mountains. Ethan respected him immediately. Miguel moved without complaining, breathing in through his nose, out through his mouth, showing the practiced endurance of someone who had learned to outrun death by staying calm. "You're holding up better than most rookies," Miguel grunted, glancing at Ethan. His voice was gravelly, shaped by years of shouting over storms and helicopter rotors. "Guess the Navy makes you harder than you look." Ethan kept his gaze ahead. "I'm not here as a rookie." "No," Miguel said softly. "You're here as a man looking for his dog. Sometimes that's the only kind of soldier who can survive these mountains." Walking behind them was Ava Klein, or a young search medic no older than 26, but already carrying the steady composure of someone who had spent too many nights in emergency tents. Ava was slender, with pale skin that reddened quickly in the cold and soft blonde hair tied into a low bun under her wool cap. Her blue eyes darted constantly around the landscape, scanning for signs of danger or life with equal intensity. She had a gentle face, round cheeks, small mouth, but her voice carried a firmness that left no room for argument. "Storm's shifting," Ava said, glancing at her handheld wind gauge. "Visibility's dropping to under 30 feet. If we lose the ridge markers, we'll need to tether in." Miguel nodded. "Just another day in paradise." Ethan's breath crystallized in the air. "We keep going." Miguel paused, studying Ethan with a mixture of sympathy and practicality. "These mountains eat men for breakfast, Graves. I've lost friends out here who were better trained than both of us." "Valor survived," Ethan said, eyes unwavering. Miguel raised an eyebrow. "You don't know that." Ethan tightened his jaw. "I do." He didn't explain how. He didn't need to. Some truths lived in the marrow of a man's bones. They moved forward. Hours passed. Snow thickened, the wind howling like a wounded animal. The search team split into small units, each combing designated sections of Denali's South Ridge. Ethan scanned every shape in the snow, every broken tree limb, every indentation along the path. And then he saw it, a faint impression half buried beneath a fresh sheet of snow. Ethan dropped to one knee, brushing away frost with gloved fingers. A paw print, large, deep, slight drag on the right side. His heart surged painfully. Valor had a subtle gait shift from his old training injury, a tiny nuance hardly anyone noticed, but Ethan knew. Ethan always knew. Miguel crouched beside him, eyes widening. "You're sure that's him?" "Yes." Miguel exhaled slowly. "Then your boy headed south, away from the blast zone, toward the valleys." Ethan felt adrenaline cut through the cold like fire. "Toward home." Ava stepped closer. "Home? You mean Montana?" Ethan nodded. "Valor knows the way. If he was disoriented after the avalanche, he would revert to instinct. And instinct says, get back to the last safe point." Miguel rubbed a hand across his bearded jaw. "That's hundreds of miles, Graves. He's crossed harder terrain before." Miguel stared at him for a long, thoughtful moment. Then he nodded. "Nah, then we do this your way." They followed the faint prints as far as they could, But the storm intensified, swallowing tracks faster than they could find them. By dusk, the prince disappeared entirely into a stretch of ice and broken tree limbs. Ava shone her flashlight across the snow. "Without a trail, we'll lose direction. We need to regroup at base camp before we freeze out here." Ethan's muscles screamed with exhaustion. His lungs burned, but none of that mattered. The paw print had shifted everything. Valor was alive and fighting. "Let's go," Miguel said firmly. Ethan reluctantly turned away. The journey back to the base camp felt longer, colder, heavier. When they arrived, heaters blazed inside the canvas tents, casting warm orange glows across the snow. Commanders, medics, and technicians moved briskly, yet shaking off frost and shouting updates over the howling wind. Commander Rhea Collins stood near the communications tent, arms crossed, brows furrowed sharply. Her dark skin was paler than usual from cold, and exhaustion tugged at the corners of her mouth. When she saw Ethan, her expression softened slightly. "Anything?" Ethan pulled the photo from his pocket. "I found tracks, heading south." Rhea blinked. "South? That means he's going home." She looked torn between disbelief and admiration. "That would be unprecedented." "Valor was trained to return to his handler at all costs," Ethan said. Rhea exhaled slowly. "Not across states." Miguel stepped forward. "Well, ma'am, this one might be rewriting the rulebook." Rhea studied Ethan's determined eyes, then nodded. "Then we plan for a southern search, but understand this. It's Graves. My resources stay here. You go after him alone." Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm leaving in the morning." Rhea placed a hand gently on his shoulder, brief, firm. "Good luck, Navy." At dawn, Ethan set out alone. He moved through frozen ravines, across icy rivers, through forests where wind screamed between branches like ghosts warning him to turn back. But he didn't. Every mile south felt like a heartbeat, a call, a bond stretched but not broken. Days blurred. Nights froze him to the bone. But each morning he found faint signs, broken snow crust, disturbed foliage, faint paw impressions, tiny echoes of Valor's journey. And then, one morning near the edge of Montana's northern border, he saw it. A clear paw print, larger now, pressed deeper, meaning the dog was weaker, moving slower. Ethan stood in the middle of the snowy pass. Breath shaking. "Valor, you stubborn, incredible dog." He was close. Ethan pushed forward, adrenaline shredding exhaustion. He bypassed towns, hiked through abandoned clearings, crossed over ridges where the wind felt identical to the morning he first brought Valor home. And then, Valley Ridge, the slope where they had run together during training. The ridge where Valor would always pause and stare at the horizon, as though remembering another life. Snowstorm clouds churned overhead. Ethan climbed, step by grueling step. The higher he ascended, the louder the wind grew, until it drowned almost every sound. Almost, and then, a bark. Faint, fragile, a sound barely clinging to existence. Ethan's chest seized. He spun toward it, heart pounding. "Valor!" The wind swallowed his voice, but carried enough of it forward. Another bark. It weak but answering. Ethan ran, legs burning, breath collapsing, tears freezing against the corners of his eyes. The storm blew fiercely, white spirals whipping across the ridge, until a shape emerged through the blur. A dog, thin, ribs showing beneath matted fur. One ear bent from injury, paws raw and bleeding, but standing, fighting, waiting. "Valor," Ethan whispered, stepping forward. The German shepherd lifted his head. His amber eyes, duller now, but burning with the remnants of fierce loyalty, locked onto Ethan, and then he stumbled forward, collapsing into Ethan's arms with a cry that was both relief and exhaustion. Ethan dropped to his knees, cradling him. Valor pressed his head into Ethan's chest, trembling violently. Ethan held him tighter than he had ever held anything. "You found me," Ethan whispered through a shaking breath. You came home. You made it back." Valor let out a weak, broken whine, burying himself deeper into Ethan's embrace. Ethan stroked his fur, feeling every scar, every wound, every battle the dog had endured alone across mountains and storms. "You're safe now," Ethan said. "I've got you." Above them, the storm began to soften, as if nature itself bowed to the reunion. Snowflakes drifted gently instead of screaming. The clouds thinned, revealing a pale light. Ethan rose carefully, lifting Valor into his arms despite the dog's large size. Valor rested his head against Ethan's shoulder, eyes half closed, trusting him completely. Ethan looked out over the ridge, the path he had climbed, the world he had crossed, and whispered, "Let's go home." And together, they began the walk back through the snow, Ole leaving behind two sets of footprints, one from a man who would cross any distance for loyalty, and one from a dog who had done the same. The storm had passed by the time Ethan carried Valor down the slope of Snow Ridge Hill, but the cold still clung to the world like a persistent memory. Snow glittered under the pale morning light, untouched and pristine, except for the two sets of footprints trailing behind them. Ethan felt every step deep in his bones. Valor was heavy in his arms, not because of weight, but because of everything the dog had endured for the sake of coming home. When Ethan reached the bottom of the hill, an old pickup truck waited near the tree line. Eleanor Hartman, his elderly neighbor who had followed him earlier, stood outside with her red wool scarf wrapped around her neck. She was in her early 70s, short and slender, with silver hair tucked beneath a knitted beanie. Her face, lined with the gentle wrinkles of a life lived with both sorrow and grace, softened the moment she saw Valor in Ethan's arms. Eleanor stepped forward, her boots crunching on the snow. "He made it," she whispered, covering her mouth with trembling hands. Ethan nodded, voice thick. He never stopped trying. Eleanor reached out and stroked the top of Valor's head gently. "Oh, you brave thing. You held on long enough for him to find you." Valor blinked weakly, eyes softening at the familiar kindness in her voice. Ethan carefully opened the truck's back door, laying Valor onto a blanket Eleanor had prepared. The dog curled slightly, but his tail thumped faintly, a tiny spark of life responding to safety. Ethan closed the door, leaned his forehead against the cold metal for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "Let's get him home." The drive back to the cabin was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the faint rattle of windows. Ethan kept glancing at the rearview mirror, watching Valor's chest rise and fall. Each breath reassured him, grounding him amid the chaos of emotions swirling inside him. Relief, fear, gratitude, and an overwhelming tenderness that nearly broke him. When they arrived, Ethan carried Valor inside, placing him gently near the fireplace on a thick wool blanket. The cabin smelled of pine and old wood, familiar and grounding. The warmth began to seep into the room as Ethan lit the fire. Valor shifted, his body relaxing slightly as the flames crackled. "You're home," Ethan murmured, kneeling beside him. "Really home this time." Valor's eyes fluttered open, gazing up at him with a look that held gratitude beyond words. Not long after, a vehicle approached the cabin, this time a white state-issued truck. Ethan stepped outside to find Dr. Lucas Brenner, the team veterinarian, climbing out of the passenger seat. Dr. Brenner was in his early 50s, tall and slightly stooped from years of bending over examination tables. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and his blue eyes radiated quiet kindness. His thick parka hung open over a knitted sweater, and a leather medical bag was slung over his shoulder. "Heard the miracle happened," Brenner said, offering Ethan a warm, tired smile. "Where is our war hero?" "Inside," Ethan replied, gesturing for him to enter. As they stepped in, Brenner knelt beside Valor with practiced gentleness. He examined the dog carefully, checking paws, ribs, hydration, and core temperature. "He's thin," Brenner said, and his voice calm but firm. "And he's exhausted, but—" He lifted Valor's chin slightly, looking into his eyes. "He's going to make a full recovery. This dog has a will stronger than half the men I've treated." Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank God." "Thank Valor," Brenner chuckled softly, packing up his tools. "Only a dog like him could survive what he did." A minute later, another set of footsteps entered the cabin, steady, confident. Commander Evelyn Hart had arrived. She stood tall in her navy blue winter coat, her copper hair tied back tightly. Her olive-toned face, usually stern, softened when she saw Valor alive. "Well," she said quietly, stepping closer, "he did what none of our reports could predict." Ethan stood beside her. "He came home." Evelyn nodded slowly, letting out a breath. I spoke with Federal Command this morning. She turned to face Ethan. Valor has fulfilled all operational duty requirements. Effective immediately, he is retired from service. Ethan stared at her, stunned. Retired? Yes, Evelyn confirmed. He's yours now, permanently. No more missions, no more deployments, no more separation. Valor let out a soft rumble, as if he understood every word. Ethan swallowed hard. Thank you. Evelyn offered a rare, genuine smile. Don't thank me. He earned his way home. After the officials left, Ethan sat near the fire, Valor's head resting on his knee. The dog's breathing had steadied, though his body still trembled occasionally, echoes of fear, exhaustion, and the instinct to survive. Ethan ran his fingers gently through Valor's coat. You were never supposed to die out there, he whispered. And not alone, not without me. Valor nuzzled closer, as if forgiving him. Over the following days, Valor regained strength. Ethan cooked warm meals, offered constant care, and spent nights sleeping beside Valor's bed. Gradually, the dog began to walk again, first a few shaky steps, then pacing around the cabin. The frostburn on his paws healed, his ribs filled out. His coat regained its sheen. Ethan watched every small improvement with the devotion of someone who had almost lost the most important piece of his life. One afternoon, Ethan sat at his workbench carving into a strip of leather. His hands, calloused from years of military training, moved carefully. Each stroke of the tool was deliberate. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional crackle of firewood. Valor lay beside him, now fully alert, my tail sweeping occasionally across the rug. After an hour, Ethan held up the finished collar, thick leather, reinforced stitching, and a polished brass tag. Etched into the metal were the words, Valor, always finds his way home. Ethan clipped the collar gently around Valor's neck. The dog sat still, then lifted his head proudly, chest expanding with a sense of dignity that had never left him, even in the darkest days. Looks good on you, Ethan murmured. Valor barked softly, nudging his arm. Life slowly returned to normal, though normal had a new meaning now. Ethan and Valor resumed their morning walks through the snowy forest, the world quieter and kinder now that the storm inside both of them had eased. Neighbors visited, bringing food and blankets, all wanting to see the miracle dog who had crossed an entire wilderness to come home. That among them was Martha Delaney, a middle-aged farmer's wife with warm freckles and wheat-colored hair pulled back into a braid. She was tall and sturdy, with weathered hands from years of field work, but eyes as gentle as sunlight on snow. Martha knelt beside Valor every time she visited, speaking softly to him as though he were a child recovering from a nightmare. Ethan appreciated her presence, steady, calming, motherly, without being intrusive. Evenings at the cabin became peaceful rituals. Ethan cooked simple meals, stews, roasted vegetables, warm bread, and Valor lay near him, occasionally nudging his hand for scraps. Once the fire crackled to life, Ethan would sit in his old armchair, while Valor rested his head on Ethan's boots, the same boots he had worn the day they found each other in Montana. On the 7th evening after Valor's return, the sky outside turned pink and gold as the sun dipped behind the horizon. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the fading light. Ethan stood from his chair, grabbed his coat, and whistled lightly. Valor sprang up, tail wagging with renewed energy. "Come on, boy," Ethan said softly. "Let's take a walk." They stepped outside. The cold brushed against Ethan's face, but it no longer felt hostile. Valor walked closely beside him, brushing lightly against his leg every few steps, as if reassuring himself that Ethan was still there, still real, still home. They walked past the riverbank, where ice glimmered like glass. They climbed the ridge behind the cabin, the same place where Valor had once trained, once disappeared, once returned. Ethan stopped when they reached the clearing. The valley stretched endlessly below them, white and silent, wrapped in twilight. Valor sat beside him, chest rising and falling calmly. Ethan placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling the warm, steady pulse beneath his fingers. "I used to think you needed saving," Ethan murmured, "but maybe you were saving me this whole time." Valor looked up at him, eyes glowing with something ancient and loyal, a kind of wisdom only animals who have survived the impossible seem to possess. Snow began to fall again, soft, gentle flakes drifting through the golden haze of sunset. Ethan inhaled deeply, letting the clean, cold air fill his lungs. He felt whole, he felt strong, he felt home. And as they stood together on the ridge, man and dog, soldier and warrior, the world around them seemed to pause in reverence. Two survivors, and two wanderers who had crossed storms, mountains, and shadows to find their way back to one another. Together, they walked back toward the cabin, their silhouettes blending into the falling snow. Behind them trailed two parallel lines of footprints, steady, certain, unbroken. A testament to loyalty, to resilience, to love. The cabin windows glowed warmly ahead of them, promising safety, rest, and the peace they had both earned. And somewhere in that quiet moment, Ethan realized that their story was no longer one of survival. It was one of homecoming. Sometimes, the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder or light. They show up quietly, through a loyal dog who refuses to give up, through a man brave enough to believe again, or through the simple truth that love always finds a way home. In our everyday lives, we all carry storms of our own. Moments when we feel lost, moments when hope seems distant. But stories like Ethan and Valor remind us of something powerful. Even in the coldest winter, God can guide one heart back to another. He can turn fear into courage, loneliness into purpose, and a broken path into a road leading home. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to feel a little miracle today. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, and what blessing you're praying for in your own life. And if you believe that loyalty, love, and faith can still change the world, subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of hope. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide every lost soul back to the place they belong. Amen.